Okay, so 16b, 12, 13 lines down. Rav Mesharshia. Rav Mesharshia, Amar, Asya, the Kalvachomers. We are in the middle of trying to figure out the source for an onain, someone who loses relatives, that he's not allowed to do work in the temple. If he does it, invalidates the service. Rav Mesharshia, Amar, Asya, the Kalvachomer, mi Yoshev. We're going to learn it from a Kalvachomer, from someone who's sitting down. My Yoshev, someone who's sitting down, Ochel, he's allowed to eat sitting down, that's fine. So you have a leniency by him. Im avad chilel, but if he does the work, he profanes the service. Onain she'eno ochel eno din she'im avad chilel. In onain, who he cannot eat the sacrifices, so he doesn't have that leniency. So for sure, he should have the stringency that if he serves in the temple, he profanes the service. Mali Yoshev shekain pasol le'edos. Okay, but a person who's sitting down has a certain stringency that he is invalid for service. So Mali Yoshev shekain pasol le'edos, says the Gemara like we had earlier. No, but miyushav Talmud Chacham. Okay, but the Torah scholar does not need to stand when he gives testimony. So really, there's an aspect of testimony that doesn't involve standing up. So says the Gemara, yeah, but the category of sitting is still more stringent, because under that category is that a regular person has to stand up when he gives testimony. Malashem Yoshev shekain pasol le'edos. Stringent because there's an aspect of it that people have to stand when they give testimony. If you're going to ask that rebuttal, so my answer is miyoshev umechada mehana. You'll take sitting, and then you'll take one of the other invalidations. Someone who's blemished, a Kohen who's blemished, a Kohen who's impure, and from both of them, you'll learn out that an onain, someone who's an onain, is not able to do the service. So either you'll learn a direct Kalvachomer from someone who's sitting, or you'll learn it together with something else. You'll do a tzad shava. You'll find a commonality, and then together you're going to learn out a onain. Okay. Now, the next part, onain pasol. So continuing the idea about an onain being invalid, Rav is going to make a certain statement, and basically, he's going to be attacked with 3 Kalvachomers. and each one is basically taking verses in the Torah and trying to expand them. And after seeing that the Kalvachomers are going to end up contradicting each other, you can get a Kalvachomer going both ways, and they're going to contradict each other. We're going to say that, you know what, leave the psukim exactly as they're mentioned in the Torah. Don't expand it more than what it says, and that's it. Okay. Now, so an onain is pasol. Someone who's an onain is invalid. Amar Rava, says Rava, what are we talking about? Lo shanu ela bekorban yachid, aval bekorban tzibor marat. Rava wants to suggest that this idea that an onain is invalid is only invalid to do the services of someone else's private sacrifice. However, bekorban tzibor, if he's bringing a communal sacrifice, and even though he's an onain, it's going to work. It's not going to be invalid, rather it will be valid. So that's the first distinction that Rava wants to make. How does Rava know that a communal sacrifice breaks the rules, and even though the Kohen is an onain, it's still valid? How does he know that? Kalvachomer mi tuma. He learns it from a Kalvachomer, from the invalidation of impurity. What's the Kalvachomer? Ma tuma shelo hutra michlala eitzel kohen hedyot eitzel kohen gadol bekorban yachid. So let's look at tuma. So tuma. So tuma. Let's say the kohen's invalid. So the the tuma itself, the category of tuma, is sometimes waived. One second. Yeah, so tuma, so if it's a personal offering the Kohen Gadol brings, so then there is no permissibility that if it's tamei, or if the Kohen Gadol is tamei, he's able to bring that sacrifice. However, when it comes to a regular Kohen and it's a communal offering, and it's tamei, then it can be brought. So you have a invalidation by a Kohen Gadol, but you don't have that invalidation by a regular Kohen. So ma tuma shelo hutra mechala eitz Kohen Gadol, tuma which is not permitted when it's talking about a Kohen Gadol and his personal sacrifice, but yet hutra eitz hedya bekorban tzibur, but yet when it comes to a communal offering, a regular Kohen can bring it even though he's tamei. So now, aninos, the state of aninos, shahutra mechala eitz Kohen Gadol, aninos which is allowed, it has a leniency when it comes to a Kohen Gadol, even by his own personal korban, by a korban yachid. Eino din shahutra eitz Kohen hedya bekorban tzibur. So for sure, it should be permissible by a regular Kohen when it comes to a communal sacrifice. So we can learn out a kal v'chomer from aninos to tuma. So once again, Rava says that aninos is only going to apply that invalidation by a personal offering, but not by a communal offering. How does he know that? Because by tuma has no permissibility by a Kohen Gadol's personal offering, and yet has a permissibility by a communal offering. Aninos, which has permissibility by a Kohen Gadol's personal offering, shouldn't that for sure have permissibility even by a communal offering? That's what Rava wants to suggest. Now, Rava bar Ahilai is going to ask 3 kal v'chomers that are going to come out contradicting themselves, end up being a question on Rava, to which we're going to conclude that all the verses should stay where they are. Yeah, so let's see. Maskif la Rava bar Ahilai lo tutar aninos eitz Kohen Gadol b'korban yachid. Says Rava, maybe you should not allow. Now, this is not really true, but maybe he's suggesting now you should not allow aninos if a Kohen Gadol is in a state of aninos. So you should not allow him to bring his personal korban. Mikal v'chomer, from a kal v'chomer. Uma tuma shehutra eitz Kohen hedya b'tzibur. Why? Just like tuma is allowed when it comes to communal offering, and it's in a state of tuma, it's impure, you're allowed to bring it. You're allowed to bring it if it's a communal offering, and yet it's not allowed lo hutra eitz Kohen Gadol b'korban yachid. It's if it's impure and a Kohen Gadol wants to bring it, and it's a personal offering, he can't bring it. Aninos shelo hutra eitz Kohen hedya b'korban tzibur. Aninos, which doesn't have that same leniency when it comes to a communal offering brought by a regular Kohen. Eino din shelo tutar eitz Kohen Gadol b'korban yachid. So it's for sure should not be permitted when it comes to the personal sacrifice of a Kohen Gadol. So right now he's suggesting that the whole permissibility, that whole part of the Torah that says that a Kohen Gadol has to serve even when he's an onein, when he's in a state of aninos, is only referring to a communal offering, not a private offering. That's one. V'tutar tuma eitz Kohen Gadol b'korban yachid mikal v'chomer. And secondly, that which we say that really an offering is permitted, even though if it's in a state of impurity, is only by a communal offering. That's where the Torah says it. But he's going to say now, no, with a kal v'chomer, I'll tell you, even by a private offering, a personal offering, it should also be permitted. How do I know? Mikal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? Uma aninos shelo hutra eitza kohen hedyot b'korban tzibor. Aninos. So here's where he a little bit contradicts himself. Just like aninos is not permitted by no, sorry, not yet. Uma aninos shelo hutra eitza kohen hedyot b'korban tzibor. When it comes to a communal offering, and you're a regular kohen and you're in a state of aninos, you're not allowed to serve in the base of Mikdash. Only a kohen gadol is allowed to, not a kohen hedyot. So even a communal offering does not have that leniency. But yet, hotrait's a kohen gadol b'korban yachid. But yeah, when it comes to kohen gadol by his personal offering, it is permitted to serve as even though you're an onaim. So here we see that right now we're saying that a kohen gadol could serve even in a state of aninos by a personal offering. And just a second ago, we said that he wanted to suggest that really through a kal v'chomer, only a communal offering he could bring. So here's where it's going to contradict itself. So tuma shehodra etzel kohen hedyot b'korban tzibor, when it comes to tuma, which is allowed for a kohen hedyot to bring, even though he's impure, but that's only by a korban tzibor. That's only by a communal offering. So then for sure, eino din shehodra etzel kohen gadol b'korban yachid. So then for sure, when it comes to a kohen gadol by his own person, by a private sacrifice, so then it should for sure be permitted. And now the third one, below tusar tuma eitla kohen hedyot b'korban tzibor. And now maybe he's suggesting that maybe tuma by a kohen we should not permit impurity by a kohen hedyot, even when it comes to a communal sacrifice. So that's the simple understanding of what the Torah says. But he has a kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? Uma aninos shehutra etzel kohen gadol b'korban yachid. Just like by aninos, shehutra etzel kohen gadol b'korban yachid, that when a kohen gadol is in the state of aninos, it's permitted to bring the sacrifice, even though it's a personal sacrifice. And yet lo hutra etzel kohen hedyot b'korban tzibor. But when it comes to a communal sacrifice by a regular kohen, it's not permitted. So tuma, which doesn't have that leniency, impurity shelo hutra etzel kohen gadol b'korban yachid, eino din shelo tutar b'kohen hedyot b'korban tzibor. Tuma, which is not permitted by a kohen gadol when it comes to his personal sacrifice, should for sure not be permitted even by a communal sacrifice of a kohen hedyot. So basically, if you review those three kal v'chomers, they're going to come out contradicting each other. At the end of the day, we start off with a premise that aninos is permitted by a kohen gadol. It doesn't differentiate between a personal or communal sacrifice. Tuma is simply understood as only permitted when it's a communal sacrifice. But through the kal v'chomers, they can contradict each other. They can go both ways. So you don't know which way to go. So what do you do? On the next page. The kal v'chomers can be expounded both ways. So what do you do? So kol chada v'chada teka b'duchte. Each one is going to remain in its place, meaning you're going to leave the verses in their simple understanding, and you're going to leave them in their simple understanding, and not derive a kal v'chomer from them. Yeah. So which would mean that by a kohen gadol, when it says he's allowed to serve in a state of aninos, and there's no differentiation in the Torah between a yachid and a tzibor, between a personal sacrifice or a communal sacrifice, both of those are permitted by a kohen gadol. That's one. However, when it comes to a kohen hedyot, he's never allowed to serve in a state of aninos, not even by a communal sacrifice. That's that. When it comes to impurity, the only time we find it that it's permissible is when it comes to a communal sacrifice. Even a regular kohen hedyot, he can serve in a state of impurity as long as it's a communal sacrifice, but not a personal sacrifice. So that which we prohibit a regular kohen to serve in a state of aninos applies across the board. We only permit it by a kohen gadol. But when we permit it across the board. That which it's prohibited to serve in a state of impurity, that's only going to be when it's going to be a personal sacrifice. However, when it's going to be a communal sacrifice, then that's going to be that's going to be permitted. Okay, it's a little complicated. That these three kal v'chomers. I have my own little chart I made, so I just forgot to bring it. So, but if you go through them, you'll see they're going to come out contradicting each other, which we say leave it in its simplest, purest form, and don't derive the kal v'chomers. So, from here you pull out a rule that by a kal v'chomer, if you can have a contradicting kal v'chomer, so then you don't have a right to derive the first kal v'chomer. You have to leave it at a standstill. You can't go either way. Okay. Now we get to different levels of impurity. A tful yom. So somebody who went to the mikvah, but he's waiting for the sun to set. So we're gonna have a tful yom. And then we're gonna also have a mechusar kippurim, someone who already went to the mikvah and the sun set, but he hasn't brought a sacrifice yet. So one by one, tful yom minala detanya Rabbi Simai Omer remez a tful yom shim avad chilo. So whenever it says remez, it's like a little bit of a farther stretch of an exposition, but nevertheless it's still a source for a tful yom. Shim avad chilo. How do you know that if he serves in the base of Mikdash, he's going to invalidate the service? Talmud lomar kedoshim yihiu velo yichalalu. So it says you should be holy and you shouldn't profane. So what's that referring to? So maybe you'll say it's referring to simply someone who is going to be in a state of impurity. However, we already have sources for that, so it can't be referring to that. So there we say in Eino Inyan, if it's not referring to Utame, the Nafik Mivayinazru, which we had yesterday, we already know that someone who's impure is invalid from Vayinazru. So therefore, what is this verse referring to? Teneu Inyan L'Tvul Yom. Therefore, it's referring to somebody who is a Tvul Yom, who's someone who's waiting for sunset. Says the Gemara, Ema Teneu Inyan L'Koreach Korcha. Now, how did you choose this out of all the invalidations? There's also an invalidation to make a bald spot. There's also an invalidation to shave part of one's payas, part of one's beard. So how did you know it's a tvul yom and not the other invalidations? So says the Gemara, tvul yom dim avad b'misa minolan. How do you know that a tvul yom will get the death? Is chayiv misa? He gets a death sentence if he serves. The gamar chilul mitruma, because it's learned out from truma, the puzzle betruma. Second, chilul mitruma, the puzzle betruma mechel avoda, the puzzle betruma lo mechel avoda. So we're basing it off truma. That's somebody who's invalid for eating truma is someone who's going to invalidate the service. Can you do this on the other side? I just have a hard time concentrating. Oh. So if you're in daven, don't do it. Just not right here, because it's hard. Oh. I just want to listen to you. So can you listen over here if you're going to daven? I just can't focus. So. It's me. It's not you. It's me. No. You can sit right here. You can sit right here and listen. It's very important that you can sit right here. It's fine. Beautiful share that you're giving. So beautiful. It's hard for me to focus. I just can't focus on one. Yeah, but you can sit right here. Great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Okay. So Amar Rabbah. So after all the dust settles, we have three invalidations that are all related to impurity. You have someone who's impure, that's one. You have someone who went to the mikveh, but he's not able, but the sun hasn't set yet for him, so he doesn't have full atonement. And the third one is umechusar kippurim. You have somebody who went to the mikveh and the sun set, but he hasn't brought the sacrifice at the end that's going to fully purify him. A nazir, a mitzorah, people like that. So why do you have to have all three of these? Maybe just have one and learn the rest of them, from there. So says the Gemara like this. If we only had someone who's regular tumah and we only taught that such a person can't serve in the base of Mikdash, what's going to happen? Shekain mitame. Tame shekain mitame. Maybe that's very strict because someone who's impure can impurify other things. We know that tumah travels, impurity travels. If you're tumah, you can impurify other things. However, but they're not going to be able to be learned out. A tzvul yom and a mechusar kippurim can't be learned out from someone who's tamei. Shekain, lo asimine. No. Lo asimine. Shekain. No, sorry. Because Rachmana Tame, Shekain, right? Shekain Metame. Tuma is Metame others. Betvul Yom and Mechusar Kippurim Lo Asimine, Shekain Pasul Betruma. Those two, you're invalid to eat Truma. The Mechusar Kippurim, Tvul Yom Lo Asimine, Shekain Mechusar Maisa. Once again, because I want to tame shekain metame, that impurifies. So betul yom mechusar kippurim lo asimine. You can't learn out of mechusar kippurim from a tvul yom shekain possible truma. He's invalid for truma, so you can't learn it out from there. But mechusar kippurim, if you only had mechusar kippurim, so then a tvul yom lo asimine shekain mechusar mais. Okay, there we go. So each one individually has something unique about it. So once again, someone who's impure can impurify others, so you can't learn from him. A tvul yom, someone who's waiting for the sun to set, is possible from eating truma. So you can't learn out of mechusar kippurim from him. A mechusar kippurim, you can't learn from him because he's very strict. He's still waiting. He has to do an act. Shekain mechusar maisa. He's not just lacking a sunset. He has to do an action to purify himself. So maybe he's on a higher level of tumah. It's more stringent. Okay, fine. So that's how you read that. Now, mechada lo asa. You're right. From each one of these individually, they have something unique about them that you can't learn it. However, teisei chada mitarti. Why don't you just write two of them? Leave out the source for the third one. Write down two of them, and from those two, you're going to learn it out. So which one are you going to choose out of these three? Which one are you going to omit and then learn the other two from there? So the high lo lichta rachmana. So maybe the Gemara suggests lo lichta b'mechusar kippurim. Don't write mechusar kippurim, the one who still has to bring a sacrifice. V'teisei mehana. Learn out mechusar kippurim from the other two, from tamei and from a tvul yom. Says the Gemara, I can't do that. Why not? Well, we see that we didn't do that. We had a source for all three. Why? The other ones are pasul betruma. So since they're pasul betruma, you'll say that they're more strict, as opposed to mechusar kippurim. If he's lacking a sacrifice, he's not pasul from eating truma. So why don't you just not write by a tvul yom, the guy who's waiting for the sunset, and you learn the other ones from him? So it says the Gemara, what are you going to ask on that? Let's say you didn't write tvul yom, and you have mechusar kippurim and tamei. So demai parachta, you'll say malahonach shekain mechusar and maisa. So maybe you'll say that if you didn't write a tvul yom, you only had tamei and mechusar kippurim. So what are you going to say? Maybe they're all lacking a maisa. They're both lacking an action of bringing a korban, and a tvul yom does not have to bring a korban. Right? Someone who's tamei has to go to the mikvah. He has to do an action. Someone who is lacking a sacrifice has to bring a sacrifice. He's lacking an action. So maybe you can't learn out a tvul yom from them who's not lacking an action. Maybe someone who's still lacking a maisa in action is more strict. So only if they serve in the temple, is going to invalidate the service. But a tvul yom who's just waiting for the day to pass and doesn't have to do anything, the Gemara is assuming now that his level of impurity is lower. It's a lower level of impurity since you have to do less. That's the assumption. If you have to still do an action, so then you're on a higher level of impurity. So you have to do more to remove it. You have to do an action to remove your impurity. If you're on a lower level of impurity and all you're waiting for is a day to pass, so then you're that's a lower level of impurity. So maybe you'll say malahonach shekain mechusar and maisa. So says the Gemara, but so klisha la tumasam. At the end of the day, it sounds at the end of the day, even the mechusar kippurim who's waiting to bring the korban, his level of tumah is still, it's very weak. Klisha is weak. It's a very weak level of tumah, and therefore we're not going to say because he has to bring a sacrifice, he's on a higher level of impurity. He's still on a weaker state of impurity. So To that, the Gemara now is going to say something that's going to get us started. It's going to a domino effect. Kisavar, this opinion holds that that mechusar kippurim dezav is kizav dami. So now, basically, there's going to be a question now: is someone who's lacking a sacrifice, is he on a weaker level of impurity or not? So Rabbah, who said that we need all three verses, mechusar kippurim, tamei, and tvul yom, he holds that a mechusar kippurim dezav. So let's take the example of zav, the male who had a certain emission, which renders him impure. Let's say he's at the end of his impurity and he has to bring a sacrifice. So is he now at a lower level of impurity or no? Well, he went through a lot of impurity. He's purified himself in many ways, but he hasn't brought the sacrifice yet. So the question is going to be, does that consider him a lower level of impurity or the same level of impurity as a zav? Meaning almost like all or nothing until you've reached the end. Right? If you're racing, the fact that you got within 3 miles of the finish, so that's a nothing. You didn't finish the race. We don't care how much closer you got. So that's going to be the machlokas. If someone who's lacking a sacrifice, the same level of impurity as a zav, or we say no, he's not the same level of impurity as a zav. If he is the same level of impurity as a zav, so you see, he's still very strict. So you have to have all three sources to teach you that if he serves in the temple, it's going to impurify the service. Sounds like if he is not as strict and it does have a lower level of tumah, and that was really the last line of the previous amud that potentially you could learn from. You could learn a tvul yom from him because they're both on a lower level of tumah. So now that we mentioned this line to teach you that you need all three sources, tvul yom, mechusar kippurim, and tamei, each one needs their own source. And now that's predicated off the fact that a mechusar kippurim, even though he's only missing to bring in a sacrifice, however, he's still on a very high level of tumah. Therefore, he needs his own verse. Now that we said that, mechusar kippurim dezav kizav dami. That itself is a tanai. We're suggesting that's actually a machlokas tanai. The Tanya, by a sarfa, right? By a para aduma. So let's say by a para aduma, an onain or a mechusar kippurim is sheira, meaning they're allowed to burn the ashes. Rashi explains that, like we said earlier, the sanctity of the para aduma is what we call kache bedek abayis. It's a lower level of sanctity. It's more of a sanctity like you'd have for the upkeep of the temple, as opposed to intrinsic sanctity. So there, even an onain or a mechusar kippurim, someone who hasn't brought the sacrifice yet, that is going to be ksheira. They're allowed to go, I think, and burn the ashes of the paraduma. Yeah. Okay. So that's the first opinion. However, Yossi Bavli Omer onain ksheira mechusar kippurim psula. In onain is kosher, but not a mechusar kippurim, he's invalid to do that burning. Ma'ilav b'hok kemiflagi. Mar savar mechusar kippurim dezav kizav dami. Master holds Mar savar that mechusar kippurim is really kizav. And therefore, it's very chomer, it's very strict, and therefore it's going to be invalid to do that. Umar Savar Lav Kizav Dami. He's not as strict as a Zav, and therefore it'll be permissible. So that which Rabbah held is a mechusar kippurim, someone who's lacking a korban, is on the same level of impurity as a Zav, and he's no closer to the finish line until he brings a sacrifice. That itself sounds like a machlokas tanaim. That itself is a dispute among the tanaim. Says the Gemara, no. Their dispute is really something different. Look, the kuli alma kizav dami. Everyone agrees that a mechusar kippurim like Rabbah is really kizav dami. The fact that you haven't brought your sacrifice yet, you're still on the same level of impurity as you were when you started. After the mikvah and after sunset, doesn't matter. That sacrifice is vital. So until you bring it, you're on the same level of impurity as you were when you first became a zav. Okay, if that's true, then what's the machlokas in this brisa between a mechusar kippurim, can he or can he not burn the ashes of the paraduma? What's that machlokas? The chsiv, it says in the Torah, he's a hatahor. It says that only the tahor can sprinkle the ashes michlal. So, yeah. So yeah, Rashi gives us background that the pure one has to sprinkle. So okay, what's wrong with that? Nothing. However, the verse earlier says, it already told us. It says, Rashi says, Ish tahor. The previous verse already told us that an Ish tahor, a pure person, is the one who sprinkles the ashes onto the person who's impure. So we already know that. So what does the next verse teach me? But he's a tar. Oh, by the way, a tar has to do it. We know that already. Michlal, it must be someone who's tahor, but not fully tar. Michlal shehu tameh. So who's someone who's tar but tameh? Limed al tvul yom shekasher bepara. The verse that says someone is pure, and then, but it already says somebody who is pure. So it's referring to someone who's pure but impure. Who is pure but impure? The tvul yom, someone who went to the mikveh, so he's pure. However, the sun hasn't set yet, so he's not fully pure. Such a person is kasher bepara. However, that's one opinion. But yeah, that's one opinion. Okay, and now Mar Savar, Tuma dechol haTorah kula, Umar Savar Tuma dehach parsha. Yeah. So now, what kind of tvul yom are we referring to? So the one opinion holds it's a tvul yom in kol haTorah kula. So Rashi explains that it's somebody at any level of impurity, as long as somebody went to the mikvah, that's somebody who can sprinkle this on the paraduma, and even a tvul yom of a zav. Now it's a funny thing. We're calling him a tvul yom of a zav, but we're really referring to somebody who hasn't brought the korban yet. Meaning it's someone who's partially pure and partially impure. So that could even refer to a zav who's mechusar kippurim. If that would be true, then that would be the explanation of the the first opinion that allows the mechusar kippurim to sprinkle the blood. The other opinion says no, it's only a tvul yom the oso parsha. What's oso parsha? We only sprinkle the paradum on someone who came in contact with a corpse of someone who's tamei mace. So only a tvul yom of a tumas mace is allowed to sprinkle the blood. So is allowed to sprinkle the ashes. Sorry, on the person who's tamei, who's impure. So two opinions: who's allowed to sprinkle the blood on the ashes of the paraduma on someone who is impure? For sure, a pure person. That's learned out from the previous verse. That's for sure true. Then the verse repeats itself. Another kind of pure person can also sprinkle the ashes. Who is that pure person referring to? Two opinions. Either somebody who's on his way, went to mikvah, and now he's waiting for sunset, he's waiting to bring a korban, but he's still somewhat more pure. So you see from there, it's not all or nothing. That's one opinion, and that's the first opinion in the Brisa. And the second opinion holds no. It's somebody of tvul yom of oso parsha. It's only somebody who actually, it's including somebody who himself came in contact with a dead person. He was tamei mace, and now he finished his process, except for he's waiting for sunset. So only that kind of tvul yom, but not anybody else. Not a mechusar kippurim. No one like that can sprinkle the ashes on the para aduma. Therefore, Hilchah says the Gemara, onein v'tvul yom, the tamei sheretz the kili, also b'kal v'chomer. So if that's true, so then let an onein or a tvul yom, so either an onein, someone whose relative passed away and they haven't buried them yet, or a tvul yom the tamei sheretz, or maybe a tvul yom of somebody who touched one of the insects that makes somebody impure. So they're a lower level of impurity. They're a less stringent level. The kili, they're more lenient. So maybe asu b'kal v'chomer. Let it go through a kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? Mitvul yom demes. And they can be learned out from a tvul yom demes. Those people can be learned out, meaning a tvul yom demes is very strict. So if he's allowed to sprinkle the ashes on the person who's tamei, so maybe an onein could do it also, and a tvul yom of someone who came in contact with an insect could also do that. Aval mechusar kippurim zav v'chamir, but a mechusar kippurim of a zav is so strict. Zav is a very strict level of impurity. Someone who's lacking full atonement, he hasn't brought the sacrifice yet, he cannot be learned out from there. Now, why is a mechusar kippurim of a zav? Zav is the male who had an emission, he's one level of impurity, and someone who came in contact with the dead is another level of impurity. What makes a zav more chomer, more stringent than someone who touched the corpse, touched a corpse? But interesting in the world of tuma, how the Torah views it. Shekain tuma yotzelav migufo. Look, the zav. It's interesting. Where does his tuma originate from? Internally. Where does the tuma of someone who touches a dead person originate from? Externally. So it's interesting. Apparently, in the world of tuma, that adds a level of stringency. You could have understood it just a happenstance. His is internal, that's external. What should be the difference? A zav is a zav, and tumas meis is tumas meis, and they're both the same level of stringency. But says Gemara, no, a zav, because it started intrinsically, right? Intrinsically, so that's much that's much more stringent than external. So much so that just because the Tvul Yom of a Tamei Mace, of a person who's impure, because he came in contact with a dead person, just because he could sprinkle the ashes of the Paraduma, but someone who's a Zav, because it's an internal Tuma, an internal impurity, that's much more stringent. The same way in terms of medically, right? You have internal wounds and you have external wounds, right? We had earlier in where was it, in Bava Basra and Shavuos, by Shabbos, you mechal Shabbos when it's an internal wound, because that's going to be much more fatal. So internal impurity is the same thing. It's more fatal, so to speak. Okay, that's that. Now a few more minutes. Mechusar begadim. Someone who's lacking the priestly garments is going to be also invalid if he serves in the temple. He's going to invalidate the korban. No, how do I know? I'm Rabbi Abo, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Umatu b'shmei Rabbi Lazar, and Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Abo in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, said in the name of Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Kra, v'chigar to osim avnet. They should wear the belt. Arunu vanov v'chavashlam magvos. They should wear the belt and they should put on their big hats, their big priestly hats. V'haiselahem kihuna lechukas olam, and their priesthood should be upon them forever. So what does that mean? So says the Gemara, Bisman shebigdehem alehem kahuna sam alehem. At the time that their clothing is upon them, their kahuna is upon them. Ain bigdehem alehem, ain kahuna sam alehem. Their if their garments are not upon them, then their kahuna is not upon them. I didn't see it here. However, I think it's in Hedron. No. In one of the Mesechtas, when the Gemara quotes this is a commonly quoted line. It's quoted, how many times it's quoted? It's quoted a lot of times. No, maybe only in Sanhedrin. I think there are Rishonim that take this very literally. I mean, they apply to Kohanim nowadays. Certain privileges Kohanim have, you give them the first aliyah, you bench first, is not going to apply because they're not wearing their priestly garments. So we don't hold like that, but some take this very literally to apply even nowadays. So either way, the Home Hachanafka. So now says the Gemara, you're learning from here that it has to be kahuna upon them with chukos olam. That's your source. I learned it from somewhere else. The Home Hachanafka, Mehasanafka. I learned from over there. The Tanya. We're going to learn that from Minayim, L'Shasuya Yain, Shim Avad Chilo. How do I know that someone who's intoxicated? And by the way, if I remember correctly, this is a test question I had 12 years ago, 13 years ago. I think we all got it wrong. That the intoxication level for a Kohen to not serve in the temple is very little. I think it's like a revius of wine. It's not a lot. It's not like, it's not the DUI test they have to take. It's much less. So I think I'm not sure if it's exactly a revius, but it's a very small amount. So if he has that, and the same thing by a rabbi answering questions, we're going to see later. Yeah, I think we're going to see later. They wouldn't answer questions for a day after their Yontif Suda. They had some wine. The wine was strong. That's it. For a day, they couldn't answer questions because they didn't feel they were in the fully right state of mind. Yeah. So you're saying most people are drunk anyways without drinking wine. Okay, fine. So they for sure can't answer. So Shim Avad Chilal. If a person who's a little bit intoxicated, if he drinks wine and then goes to serve, he invalidates the service. So Shim Avad Chilal. Talmud Lomar. How do I know that? It says Yayin v'Shecher al Tesht. Says you shouldn't drink any wine. Ulahavdil ben kodesh ubein chol, and there to separate from holiness to non-holiness. So Rashi explains a service that you do while intoxicated is called chol. It's called, we know chol in terms of weekday, not ben kodesh the chol, but chol means something which is not not holy. It's not kadosh. So someone who's intoxicated and does that is going to be it's called chol, and someone who's intoxicated cannot serve in the temple. Fine, that's all good by somebody who is intoxicated. We're asking about someone who's not wearing the right clothing. I think we're gonna have to finish that tomorrow. Yeah.
Yasher Koach.